Hello, and thank you for joining Module 1. In this module, we're going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, what they mean, how they were created, and why they matter. So, let me start by saying welcome to the Anthropocene, the age of human being. The Anthropocene is the geological age where humanity's impact on the Earth's atmosphere, oceans, and wildlife has been so significant that it has pushed us into a new geological epoch known as the Anthropocene. And this is a result of our excessive consumption patterns, our enthusiasm for spreading materials like aluminium, concrete, plastic, but also because of nuclear testing and the rise of greenhouse gas emissions, which you all know about. For example, today 90% of the world's plant activity occurs where human beings have a significant impact. In fact, we as humans now move more sediments, rocks, and sands in a year than all the oceans, seas, rivers, and waterways combined. We've been walking across the surface of this planet for less than 1% of its history, and already we've made such an impression and impact where we have become a shaping force and we have changed the geological landscape and the evolution of this planet. But that's not all. Scientists have recently confirmed that we are now officially entered a period of new mass extinction. That's the sixth mass extinction in the history of our planet. Conservationists have been warning us for years that species from frogs to birds to bees to tigers are being threatened by loss of habitat, climate change and disease. But we haven't been paying close attention to them. Going at such rate, we will be actually tipping many of the planetary boundaries and getting into trouble with our environment. And you don't have to look far to see that natural disasters are becoming more commonplace. They're picking up in intensity and the numbers are going to go up rapidly. This is because of climate change. But that's not all. What if I told you that in the past decade, two of the most brutal civil wars have been in part triggered by the impacts of climate change? In Darfur, Sudan, the expansion of the Sahara Desert to the east and the lack of access to water, which in part was triggered by climate change, helped get started into a conflict. In Syria, a similar case has occurred. Due to the continuous drought in the northeast part of the Mediterranean, which then had an impact on Syria, a huge movement of people into the cities occurred. Young farmers began to move into cities, and this created pressure on social systems and intensified the civil war. This is not to say that climate change is causing these conflicts, but that climate change is playing a role and multiplying the threat and intensity. Which brings us to another issue, conflict. In Syria, years of development and billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure, housing, and social services were reversed in a matter of a couple of years. There has been a complete collapse of the economic foundations which have led to the loss of roughly $200 billion since the conflict began. And those numbers are actually from 5 years ago. So now, as a result of the conflict, it has plunged 80% of Syria's population into poverty. Life expectancy has gone from 76 years to 55 years in a matter of very few years. 5 out of every 6 Syrians now live in poverty. This has also led to a global plight of refugees, as we have seen in recent years, which has fueled radicalism in parts of the world, which has created political polarization, which is threatening multilateralism, is threatening the way we conduct diplomacy, and many other conducts. An example would be certain countries pulling out of the Paris Agreement or other peace and security agreements. So you see, a conflict or war could completely dismantle billions of dollars of investments, decades of progress, and the very fabric of society. Another issue that we face in this century is that a very small percentage of individuals are owning most of the wealth on this planet. We are living in a crisis of wealth inequality. The monetary gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger and bigger. In other words, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. In fact, there was a recent survey by Oxfam which revealed that 42 of the richest individuals on this planet have as much wealth as the bottom 3.8 billion poorest. So that means 42 individuals own as much money as the poorest half of the planet. While this is occurring, today there are at the same time 1 billion people who still live in extreme poverty. They're incredibly vulnerable to climate change and conflict. There are 1 billion of them who live on less than $2 a day. These individuals lack access to water, to basic healthcare, which means that every year 6 million children under the age of five die because of preventable diseases. Millions of kids are malnutritioned. Approximately 260 children can't even go to school, especially girls. Almost 1 billion people don't have access to clean water and sanitation. And every night, almost 750 million people go to bed hungry. So how can such suffering be justified when such a group of people own as much wealth as the bottom half of the planet? In fact, according to Forbes magazine, today there are approximately 2,000 billionaires on this planet. Together, these billionaires have a collective wealth of $10 trillion. Only 1% of their wealth could eradicate extreme poverty in most parts of the world. The former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, "We are the first generation that can eradicate extreme poverty and the last generation that can fight climate change." We have that capacity, but political unwillingness is making it difficult. This is a testament to the state of the planet. How can we live in a world that's supposed to be resilient in the face of challenges of the 21st century where we're facing these fundamental issues? What's more is that the UN projects there will be roughly 9 to 10 billion people on the planet by the year 2050. But in a planet of this size, with this population, within 31 years, how will we feed it? How will we satisfy the material resources it needs, such as clothes, furniture, stationery, computers? How will we satisfy the energy needs? How will we produce enough energy to be able to operate our systems? How will we satisfy our security, space, and other needs, such as housing, healthcare, education, access to water, you name it? Imagine the ramifications, the pressures that would have on the planet's resources with such a trajectory. These questions are really the essence of sustainable development. Sustainable development is a quite simple concept. Although many people might think that it's very complicated or that it's about just the environment, it's not. It's not complicated. It's about the world. It's a principle, a commitment. By its most well-known definition, sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It is a commitment to well-being of your children and your children's children. It is simple as that. So, motivated by such a concept, world governments came together in Rio, Brazil in 2012, and they said, let's do something about these. They said these issues and these threats the planet is facing go beyond politics, and we need a plan of action. So, a process began. One of the most and biggest and most inclusive consultation processes in the history of the planet, to define and set a series of goals and objectives to guide this new plan, and specifically up to 2030. So, a process was created. Governments had a say and negotiated the agreement. That's every single government. NGOs got involved. There were lots of national surveys, young people, children, companies, different organizations. It was very, very large scale. And it took 3 years. There were intense negotiations, and as a result, world leaders and world governments came to the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2015, these world governments from 193 countries adopted these Sustainable Development Goals, which had 17 goals and 169 targets. Every single one of these goals were negotiated through tough processes by all governments. Because I often hear people say that these are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. which kind of assumes that they were made by the United Nations and then handed down to governments to achieve. No, that's not what happened. All governments negotiated and promised to deliver on them. That includes your government. Why are these goals important? Well, they give us a fighting chance. They're a concise framework that addresses the challenges we face as a civilization in a very comprehensive manner. And that's what's important about them. Well, you might ask, the world negotiated for 3 years and came up with these goals. We already knew poverty exists and we've been fighting it. We know hunger exists, we know it's a problem. We know health, education, climate change, energy, all of these are issues that are being addressed or are threatening us, but we already knew about these. So what's so special about the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals? What are the purpose of it? How do these help? Well, the purpose of the SDG framework can be broken down into 4 components. The first, the SDGs are a policy benchmark. You see, governments need benchmarks to set their goals and targets and to adjust their budgets and government resources to meet them. It also allows them to measure it and have those goals for themselves. And this framework enables governments to do that. So despite the idealistic nature of the SDGs, they're actually a very practical tools for governments. Secondly, social mobilization. Because when the goals are easy to understand, they're time-bound and idealistic, then organizations, civil society can mobilize around them. When you have goals with clear targets, people can keep track of them and judge their governments, their businesses, local communities on their performance. So this framework is not just for governments or businesses or NGOs, but also for the people these organizations serve. Thirdly, it creates peer pressure. When there is a common framework and a global agreement, by the way, which has been called the most important agreement of the 21st century, when governments do well, it puts pressure on others. As a way of showcasing their ability and their progress, governments can compete with one another. So this encourages a healthy competitive spirit and pushes us into action. And fourth, and finally, and the most important part of the SDG framework, the SDGs are interlinked. You can't achieve one without taking into consideration the other goals. And this increases and encourages cooperation between different sectors. And we are to solve a lot of our problems that the SDGs are trying to address. We need more cooperation. We need to stop operating in specific silos and in specific departments. Whether it's the United Nations, whether it's an NGO or companies, it doesn't matter. Organizations and groups and agencies working on these various goals need to cooperate and talk to one another. And this will help improve outcomes and help us overcome many of these common challenges. I can give you one example about the interconnectivity of the SDGs to make that apparent. Let's think of goal 1, poverty eradication. So poverty can lead to hunger and malnutrition. So that's goal 2. Malnutrition and hunger can lead to health problems, which is goal 3, which may prevent a child from completing their education, which is goal 4. In such circumstances, in many parts of the world, boys are more likely favored over girls for further education. That's just goal 5. If no infrastructure exists, which is goal 9, there can be no hospitals for healthcare in the first place, but also no schools for education. And if access to energy, which is goal 7, is not available, schools and hospitals cannot operate altogether, which would leave big portions of the population at health risks, but also limited access to schooling, which would create, of course, serious challenges from the development and the growth of the economy, but also the impact that it would have on climate change. They can't be resilient in the face of extreme weather events. They cannot prepare the infrastructure to make them more capable of putting up with the impacts of climate change. So what this proves is that goals cannot be seen in separation to one another, but as an integrated puzzle, which cannot be completed without all the 17 goals. So that's why that's important. Now, a few things to remember. SDGs apply to both developing and developed countries. They were negotiated through intergovernmental processes. Targets are strongly interlinked across different goals. There are hundreds of indicators to monitor and measure progress, and there are clear reporting mechanisms and review processes. In summary, the SDGs are a plan of action for the world. They are a serious plan which aims to take every single country towards economic prosperity, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability by the year 2030. And with this, we come to end of Module 1, where you learned about the SDGs, their importance, how they came about, and what makes them special and important for the world. See you in Module 2.